The first time I saw Linda Rawson storm up my driveway in her khaki slacks and HOA-issued clipboard, I knew something ridiculous was about to happen. My dog, Diesel, a 7-year-old black lab with more patience than I'll ever have, was laying on the front porch chewing on a rope toy. Not barking. Not growling, just relaxing like dogs are supposed to. Linda, who everyone in our neighborhood not so affectionately calls Clipboard Karen, pointed at Diesel like he was foaming at the mouth. "Mr. Zachary, this animal is a threat to the community." She shouted, already scribbling something on her form. I stepped outside, my coffee still in hand. "Linda, are you serious right now? He hasn't moved in 10 minutes. She didn't even look at me. I received a complaint. "Someone said your dog lunged at a child last week near the mailbox." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the kid who was throwing pine cones at him?" Diesel barked once and ran back to the porch. Linda flipped her page for dramatic effect. "Regardless. As acting president of the Willow Creek HOA, I'm initiating a formal inspection. I'll need access to your backyard." That got my attention. "You're not coming onto my property without a warrant or a police officer." She sniffed like she smelled something sour. "Then I'll have no choice but to escalate this matter. Dangerous animals are a liability, Mr. Zachary. And the HOA has authority to act in the interest of resident safety." I laughed. "You mean the same HOA that spent $2,000 on lavender-colored mulch that nobody wanted?" Linda's face turned the color of a boiled beet. She spun on her heel and stomped off, swinging her leash bag like a weapon. "Yeah, she carried those around even though she hadn't walked her dog in months. 2 days later, I got the notice. Mandatory HOA safety inspection concerning potentially aggressive animal on premises. Scheduled for Saturday. Signed by Linda Rawson herself. Of course, she brought backup." Saturday morning, I opened my door to find Linda, her little yappy Pomeranian named Muffin, and 2 board members, Doug and Carol, standing on my lawn. Muffin was wearing a sweater that said HOA Security. I couldn't make this up if I tried. "I trust your animal is secured." Linda asked like she was walking into a war zone. Diesel was asleep inside. I had no intention of letting him near her circus. "He's fine. You people wanted to inspect the yard, not him." Carol gave a half-hearted nod. "Let's just get this over with." I led them around the side gate. Linda insisted on going first. Muffin was in her arms, vibrating like a blender. That's when things went sideways. A squirrel darted across the yard fence and Muffin launched out of Linda's arms like a furry missile. The leash snapped out of her hand. She screamed, chasing after the dog. "Muffin. Muffin!" The yapping turned into snarling, then came the scream, not Muffin's. Linda's. We all ran toward the sound. Linda was sitting in the grass, holding her arm. Muffin was still growling, teeth bared, fur puffed up like a porcupine. Blood was dripping from Linda's forearm. "What the hell happened?" Doug asked, frozen in place. "She bit me," Linda shrieked. "My own dog bit me." I looked at Carol. She looked at me. No one said a word. Linda clutched her arm and glared at me like it was somehow my fault. I want animal control called immediately." "That beast is out of control." I tilted my head. "You mean Muffin, your dog, the one that just attacked you in my yard?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Doug finally stepped in. "We should get her to urgent care. That bites deep." As they helped her up, I couldn't resist. "Guess we'll need to issue a citation 14B. Dangerous animal on HOA premises, right?" Linda didn't answer. Her eyes were darting between the blood on her sleeve and Muffin, who was now happily peeing on my lawn. By the time an ambulance arrived, Linda had gone pale. Carol handed off Muffin to Doug, who looked as comfortable holding the snarling Pomeranian as someone juggling live wires. I stayed back near the porch, arms crossed, watching paramedics treat the puncture wounds. "You'll want to report that bite to the county," one of them told Linda as they wrapped her arm. "Animal control will follow up." "I am the HOA president," she snapped. "I'll handle it internally." The younger paramedic raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Carol lingered behind and glanced at me. "Look, this was not ideal," she said under her breath. "Let's all just cool off for a bit." "I didn't make any of this happen," I said. "She pushed for the inspection. She brought the dog. She insisted on coming onto my property." Carol nodded quickly, then hurried after the others. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But the next morning, I woke up to a printed warning taped to my door sealed with the HOA's red crest. Citation: non-compliance with HOA inspection protocols. There were 3 bullet points. Failure to properly restrain pet during inspection, hostile behavior toward HOA board members, obstruction of official safety review. I stared at the paper, dumbfounded. Diesel hadn't even been outside. And I was the hostile one. 2 hours later, I was in the county clerk's office, filing a formal dispute. I also submitted a request for all HOA meeting records from the past 6 months. The woman at the counter raised an eyebrow at that one. "You sure?" "That's a lot of paper." "I'll take it," I said. "All of it." That night, I pulled out my old scanner and started going through the documents. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just a gut feeling that something didn't smell right. By page 32, I found it. A meeting summary from 3 months ago. Buried in the fine print, Linda had proposed a pet behavior compliance initiative, a fancy name for mandatory temperament testing for all dogs over 40 pounds. The motion passed by a slim margin. But here's the kicker. The initiative included a clause stating that any animal deemed potentially aggressive could be banned from the neighborhood, pending board review. Then came the list of addresses flagged for review, and mine was at the top, highlighted. I flipped through more pages. Turns out, Linda had been compiling anonymous complaints not from residents but from herself, using fake names. R. Simmons, Tammy L. Gregby. Every one of them filed within a 5-day span, all describing the same vaguely threatening dog behavior, all referencing my block. It was a setup. But it got worse. On page 78, there was a budget breakdown. Over $4,000 allocated to a canine safety consultant named B. Rawson, her brother. A man with no listed certifications, no business license, and a criminal record for fraud back in Arizona. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding. She wasn't just power tripping, she was funneling HOA money to her family under a fake program she invented to target specific residents. I called an attorney the next morning. Not just any attorney, my cousin Rebecca, who specialized in civil litigation and had taken down 2 HOAs in her career. She listened to everything, then said, "You're sitting on a gold mine." Rebecca filed a formal cease and desist on my behalf, citing harassment, falsified documentation, and misuse of HOA funds. She also contacted the County Animal Control Board to provide a statement about the real incident, Muffin biting Linda, and made sure Diesel was cleared of any accusations. But the real fireworks started a few days later, when a county investigator showed up at the HOA office. I didn't even know we had one until I saw the gray building tucked behind the community pool. Linda wasn't there, probably still nursing her ego and her stitches, but Doug and Carol were. And when the investigator presented them with evidence of the falsified complaints, they looked like they'd just swallowed thumbtacks. "I had no idea," Carol stammered. "She said the complaints were coming from multiple residents." "She showed us printed emails." "She wrote those emails herself," the investigator said flatly, "and the money paid to her brother violates at least 3 county ordinances." Doug started stammering something about being misled when I walked in. "Funny," I said, "how a dog bite reveals an entire fraud network." The investigator glanced at me. "You're the homeowner she targeted," I nodded. He handed me a copy of the official report. "We'll be forwarding this to the district attorney. There's enough here to pursue criminal charges. At the very least, she'll be removed from her position." That part happened faster than I expected. Within 72 hours, the HOA board called an emergency vote. Linda was ousted unanimously, but she wasn't done making noise. The day after her removal, She marched into the neighborhood Facebook group backed by a dozen of her loyal followers and accused me of engineering a smear campaign and manipulating county officials. She claimed the bite was a setup, that Muffin had been provoked. That's when I posted the security footage from my backyard camera, the one I had installed last summer after a string of petty thefts. It showed everything: her walking in, Muffin escaping, the bite, the chaos. Clear as day, the comments flooded in. Wow. So that's what really happened. She bit her own arm? Nope, that dog's a menace, but not the one she tried to blame. By the end of the day, Linda had deleted her Facebook account. Meanwhile, Rebecca helped me draft a formal petition to propose an amendment to the HOA charter. All inspection requests had to be approved by a 2/3 majority of the board with transparent documentation and third-party oversight. We needed 50 signatures. We got 71. At the next HOA meeting held in the elementary school gym, because the office was being audited, we presented the petition. Carol, who'd become strangely cooperative since the scandal, nodded along as Rebecca laid out the proposal. From now on, Rebecca said, no one person gets to wield unchecked power just because they carry a clipboard. The amendment passed. Afterward, Doug approached me in the parking lot. Look, I didn't know everything she was doing. I thought she was just intense. She used fake names to accuse me of harboring a dangerous animal, I said. You signed off on it. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, I won't make that mistake again. 2 weeks later, a county notice went up on the HOA bulletin board. Formal investigation concluded. HOA President Linda Rawson found in violation of multiple state statutes. Civil and criminal proceedings pending. Muffin, according to the Animal Control Report, was rehomed with a licensed behaviorist. Diesel got a clean record and a new chew toy shaped like a gavel. I thought it was a nice touch. And me? I took down the inspection notice still taped to my refrigerator, folded it in half, and slid it under a magnet shaped like a paw print. Just to remember what happens when you try to frame a good dog and get bitten by your own lies. The fallout spread faster than I expected. A week after the footage went public, an unmarked county sedan parked outside my house. A tall man in a navy jacket stepped out, flashing a badge before I even opened the storm door. Zachary Lawson? He asked, scanning the porch like he was expecting landmines. That's me, I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. Coffee? He shook his head. Detective Halder, Financial Crimes Division. We need to talk about some recent expenditures made by your HOA. Mind if I come in? I led him inside and gestured toward the dining table. Diesel watched from under the kitchen island, tail still, eyes alert. I didn't need to say a word, he already knew something serious was up. Halder pulled out a manila folder and flipped it open. We've been reviewing transactional records tied to Willow Creek Homeowners Association. One of our auditors flagged irregular payments made to a man named Boyd Rawson. You know him, Linda's brother, I said. She paid him as a so-called dog safety consultant. Halder nodded. Right. Except he's not licensed for anything. He's also been collecting disability for the last 6 years. The payments from the HOA weren't just unethical, they were illegal under state benefit laws. And that's just the beginning. He slid a copy of a bank statement across the table. This account received over $12,000 from the HOA General Fund, marked as community services. Boyd used it to pay off a vehicle loan and purchase a boat registered under a fake LLC. I leaned back in the chair. So it wasn't just about harassing dog owners. Not even close, Halder said. Linda funneled funds through committee-approved projects but padded the budgets with fake vendor line items. Landscaping, security assessments, even a neighborhood wellness survey that never actually happened. I pulled out the binder I'd been building. I've got notes showing several of those line items were approved during closed-door meetings. No resident voting records. No public disclosures. He took the binder with the reverence of someone handed a box of gold. You just saved us 3 weeks of work. The next morning, subpoenas were delivered to 5 board members. Carol showed up at my door before noon, red-eyed and shaking. "I didn't know," she said, clutching a folder of her own. "I swear to you, Zach, I didn't know they were doing all that." I opened the door just enough to step outside. "Why would they keep you in the loop? You voted against the Pet Compliance Initiative, didn't you?" She nodded quickly. "Exactly." After that, I was left out of everything. They started scheduling meetings without notifying me. Doug said it was just informal planning. I believed him. I took the folder from her. "What's this?" Meeting notes, screenshots of our group chat, copies of receipts Linda asked me to sign off on. I didn't even realize how many of them were fake until I started comparing dates. Diesel padded up beside me and sat down, his head at my hip. Carol knelt and rubbed his ear like she was seeking absolution. "I always said you had the best-behaved dog in the neighborhood." I didn't respond. I was already planning what to do with the folder. 3 days later, a public hearing was scheduled at the municipal building. It was standing room only. Residents who hadn't shown up to a single HOA meeting in years were suddenly front row, arms crossed, jaws tight. The county prosecutor, a steely woman named Dana Ellison, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we've concluded our preliminary investigation into the financial activities of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. What we've found is a pattern of deception, misuse of community funds, and falsified documentation stretching back nearly 14 months. Linda wasn't there. But Boyd was, sitting in the back row with a lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The state is pursuing charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft of community assets. These are felonies," Dana continued. "In addition, we're recommending a full audit of the HOA's past 2 years of financials, a suspension of all discretionary spending, and a temporary oversight board appointed by the county." The room erupted. Some people cheered. Others shouted questions. Someone near the back said exactly what everyone was thinking. "How the hell did this go on so long?" I stood quietly near the side wall, Diesel's leash wound loosely around my hand. He wasn't technically allowed inside the building, but no one had the nerve to say anything. Not after what came to light. That night I got a call from Carol. She'd been named interim president by the oversight board. "I'm not proud of how I got here," she said, "but I need your help. We need to rebuild trust. You got people to pay attention. Would you consider joining the compliance committee?" I looked down at Diesel, who had taken over the middle of the couch like a king on his throne. "I'll do it," I said, "but I'm bringing my own clipboard." The first order of business was rewriting the HOA bylaws. We stripped out every clause Linda had slipped in: no more closed-door voting, no more discretionary funds without triple signatures and documentation. Every committee had to submit monthly reports, and all vendor contracts had to be open for resident review. We also added a clause requiring at least 2 non-board members on all major decisions. No more insider deals. The second order of business. Creating a pet owners advisory group led by actual certified trainers, not relatives with criminal records. The group would help mediate disputes, offer resources for new pet owners, and ensure that no one's animal was targeted without due process. At the first community meeting under the new structure, I brought Diesel up to the front and let him sit beside the podium. He yawned halfway through my speech, which got a laugh, but the mood turned serious when I held up a laminated copy of Muffin's Bite report. "This," I said, "is what happens when power goes unchecked, when rules are twisted to serve personal vendettas. We can't undo what happened, but we can make damn sure it never happens again." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then someone clapped, then another. Soon the whole room was on their feet. Afterward, a woman I didn't recognize stepped up to me near the punch table. "I used to keep my dog inside all day," she said. "I was scared Linda would find me if he barked too much. But now, we walk every morning." She nodded at Diesel. "He's kind of a local legend now," I chuckled. "He's just a dog, he just wanted to be left alone." She grinned. "Sounds like most of us." By spring, the neighborhood had changed. People started talking to each other again. The fences that had once divided us were now decorated with notes about block parties and chili cook-offs. Diesel got more treats from neighbors than I ever approved of. As for Linda, she was indicted on 4 counts and released pending trial. Her brother's assets were frozen, and the county revoked his disability status. He vanished from the state a month later. I got a letter from Linda's lawyer at one point, threatening a defamation suit. Rebecca framed it and hung it in her office beside a photo of Diesel in sunglasses. The HOA Compliance Committee now met twice a month in the library. We brought donuts. We listened. We voted, and we kept clipboards, but we never used them to intimidate. Only to remind ourselves that rules are meant to serve people, not control them. Especially not with forged emails, fake consultants, and a dog named Muffin who couldn't handle a squirrel. Somewhere out there, Linda was probably still telling anyone who'd listen that it was all a misunderstanding. But in Willow Creek, no one listened anymore. The first of the court dates was scheduled for late April, and by then, spring had hit Willow Creek like a switchblade, sudden, sharp, and full of jagged edges. The cherry trees behind the tennis courts bloomed as if nothing had happened. But we all knew better. The neighborhood wasn't avoiding eye contact anymore. People were watching. Waiting. The county's investigation had carved deep. Over a dozen residents had been interviewed, including a few seniors who'd never interacted with the HOA before, but had been charged suspicious maintenance fees for services they never received. One woman, Mrs. Darnley, had been billed for fence repairs on a metal gate that hadn't moved in 15 years. The fraud wasn't just about dogs or fake inspections. That had just been the tip. The deeper wound was financial and personal. For some, it was the realization that their dues hadn't gone toward the community pool upgrade, but instead had vanished into a boat registered in another state. At the courthouse, things moved quickly. I was called to testify on a Thursday. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Callister, watched me with eyes that didn't blink much. I'd brought the binder, the same one that had kicked all this off, but the county prosecutor already had their own stacks of evidence, bound and tabbed. "Mr. Lawson," the prosecutor began, "can you walk us through the events that led you to file your initial complaint?" I kept it brief. Just facts, no dramatics. When I finished, Linda's defense attorney rose, a man whose suit was more expensive than his arguments. "Isn't it true," he said, "that you held a personal grudge against my client due to prior disagreements?" I didn't flinch. "I didn't have a grudge until she tried to fabricate complaints against my dog and falsify inspection protocols to justify entering my property." He shifted. "But you admit you refused an inspection." "I refused an unannounced, unsanctioned inspection based on complaints your client wrote herself under fake names." The judge glanced over her glasses. "Counselor, if you're hoping to establish bias, you'll need something more compelling than a homeowner refusing unlawful entry." The jury didn't need convincing. Most of them lived in HOA-run neighborhoods. They knew the type. What sealed it, though, wasn't my testimony. It was a spreadsheet. The forensic accountant hired by the county projected it onto the courtroom screen. It showed every transaction between the HOA and businesses linked to the Rawson name. Some of the names were laughably obvious: Muffin Security Consulting, for example, but others were buried beneath shell LLCs registered in Wyoming and Nevada. The accountant explained how the same routing number had been used across multiple vendors. That was enough for the embezzlement charge to stick. The courtroom was quiet when the verdict came down, guilty on all primary counts. Linda's face didn't change, but her posture collapsed by degrees. The judge denied bail until sentencing. Her attorney didn't argue it. After the trial, I stepped outside into the parking lot. Diesel was waiting for me in the back seat of my truck, tail giving a slow, steady wag. He knew the routine by now. We drove to the dog park just outside city limits, where the HOA had no reach. I let him run until the sun started to dip. Back in Willow Creek, Things didn't just return to normal, they changed. The oversight board remained in place until the next election cycle. By then, most of the old board had stepped down voluntarily. Carol stayed on, but only as treasurer. She refused to run for president, saying she'd rather manage numbers than people from now on. The community voted to reduce the HOA's enforcement powers. Fines now required actual proof, not hearsay. Anonymous complaints were no longer accepted. And most importantly, all HOA officers had to disclose any familial or financial relationships with vendors. Transparency wasn't a suggestion anymore, it was policy. The Pet Compliance Initiative was formally repealed. In its place, we launched a volunteer-run pet resource committee. Trained behaviorists, real ones this time, held monthly workshops. One of them, a former K-9 handler named Marcus, even offered free evaluations to residents with new dogs. I ended up helping Marcus organize a neighborhood adoption event. Diesel got to be the poster dog. He handled the attention like a pro, laying on his side while toddlers climbed over him. In a moment that felt almost too poetic, one of the dogs adopted that day was Muffin. Rehomed by animal control after Linda's arrest, she'd spent a few weeks in a rehabilitation program. The family that adopted her, a young couple new to the neighborhood, had no idea of her history. They just saw a small dog with big eyes. I didn't say anything. I just watched as she rolled onto her back while one of the kids scratched her stomach. Later that night, I sat on my porch with Diesel at my feet, sipping a beer. The air smelled like fresh cut grass and charcoal. Somewhere down the block, someone was hosting a barbecue. Laughter drifted through the trees. Carol walked up, holding a thick manila envelope. She looked different, lighter, like someone who'd stopped bracing for impact. "This is for you," she said, handing it over. "It's the final audit report, clean as of last week. No more hidden transactions. No more surprise invoices." I thumbed through it. "Feels like we closed the book on something," she nodded. "We did, and opened a much better one." As she turned to leave, she paused. "You know," she said, "if you ever decide to run for the board." I shook my head. "One battle was plenty," she laughed, then walked back down the driveway. I looked down at Diesel, who was now chewing on the corner of the audit envelope. "Yeah," I said, "you earned your retirement too." In the months that followed, the story faded into memory. New neighbors moved in, unaware of what had gone down. The older ones stopped whispering about inspections and started organizing potlucks instead. The HOA, once a symbol of suspicion and stress, became what it was supposed to be, a tool for maintaining the kind of neighborhood where people actually wanted to live. No more power games. No more fake complaints. And definitely no more Karen with a clipboard. As for Diesel, he got a new bed, a custom tag that read Neighborhood Watch Commander, and more belly rubs than any dog had a right to expect. Justice had been served. And this time, the good dog got the last word.